I'm Emma, I'm 29, and I thought my wedding day would be perfect. I was wrong, dead wrong. The moment I saw Daniel burst through the doors of the Plaza Hotel ballroom, his face pale and his hands shaking as he held up his phone, I knew my life was about to shatter into a million pieces. "Emma, you need to see this video," he shouted across the room full of my wedding guests, his voice cutting through the classical music like a knife through silk. The entire ballroom fell silent. 200 guests turned to stare at this stranger who had just crashed my wedding to Michael, my fiancé of 3 years. The man I thought I knew everything about. The soft sounds of Manhattan traffic from Fifth Avenue seemed to echo louder in the sudden quiet, mixing with the gentle patter of October rain against the tall windows. If you're watching this story unfold, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love and trust. Michael's face went from confusion to something I'd never seen before, pure terror. His hand, which had been gently holding mine just seconds before, suddenly felt cold and clammy. "Who is this guy?" I whispered to him, but he couldn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on Daniel like he was seeing a ghost. "I'm Daniel Morrison," the man announced, his voice carrying across the ornate ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and elegant floral arrangements that had cost me a fortune. "I'm married to Sarah, Michael's ex-wife, and there's something you all need to know about the groom." The wedding coordinator, a thin woman named Patricia, who had been managing Plaza weddings for 20 years, tried to approach Daniel, but he held up his hand. "This won't take long. But Emma deserves to know the truth before she makes the biggest mistake of her life." My wedding dress, a custom Vera Wang that had taken months to design, suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The seed pearl beading that I had carefully chosen seemed to mock me as it caught the light from the chandeliers above. My mother, sitting in the front row in her navy blue mother-of-the-bride dress, looked like she was about to faint. My father, who had walked me down the aisle just 15 minutes earlier with tears of joy in his eyes, now stood frozen beside the altar. "Michael," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is he talking about?" But Michael couldn't speak. He was staring at Daniel's phone like it contained footage of his own execution. The October afternoon light streaming through the plaza's famous windows seemed to dim, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears like a drum. Daniel took a step closer, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. "Sarah and I have been married for 2 years. She never told me much about her ex-husband, Michael, just that their divorce was ugly and that she was glad to be done with him. But last week she started acting strange, really strange. The ballroom was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Even the waitstaff, dressed in their crisp black uniforms and ready to serve our carefully planned dinner, had stopped moving. The smell of the white roses and peonies in my bridal bouquet suddenly seemed overwhelming. She would disappear for hours at a time, Daniel continued, his voice getting stronger. She'd claim she was at work, but when I called her office, they said she wasn't there. She started hiding her phone, changing her passwords. So I did what any suspicious husband would do. I followed her. My legs felt weak. The beautiful ballroom, with its gold accents and perfect lighting that I had dreamed about since I was a little girl, started to feel like it was closing in on me. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and instead, it was turning into a nightmare. "What I found," Daniel said, holding up his phone higher so everyone could see, "was my wife meeting with your fiancé. Not just once, multiple times. And what they were doing..." He paused, looking directly at me with something that looked like pity in his eyes. "Emma, I'm so sorry you have to find out this way." The silence in the Plaza ballroom was deafening. I could hear the distant sound of New York City traffic on Fifth Avenue, but inside this ornate room, it felt like time had stopped completely. Daniel's phone screen glowed in the soft afternoon light filtering through the tall windows, and I knew that whatever was on that device was about to destroy my world. "Show me," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. My hands were shaking, causing my engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond that Michael had proposed with on the Brooklyn Bridge last Christmas, to catch the light from the crystal chandeliers above. Daniel hesitated. "Are you sure?" Maybe we should do this privately." "No." The word came out louder than I intended, echoing off the marble floors and gold-leafed walls. "If you're going to destroy my wedding, then everyone here gets to see why." Michael finally found his voice. "Emma, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I spun around to face him, my Vera Wang train sweeping across the floor. "You haven't even seen what he's going to show us, but you're already ready to explain? That tells me everything I need to know." My maid of honor, Grace, stepped forward from where she'd been standing with my other bridesmaids. We'd been friends since college at NYU, and she could read me better than anyone. "Emma, honey, maybe we should—" "No, Grace, I need to see this." Daniel walked closer, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The Plaza Ballroom, which had hosted countless society weddings and elegant events, had never seen anything like this. The waitstaff stood frozen, silver serving trays in their hands, unsure whether to continue with dinner service or evacuate. "I recorded this last Thursday," Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm. "Sarah told me she was working late at her law firm downtown, but I followed her to a hotel in Midtown. The Meridian, to be exact." The blood drained from my face. The Meridian was just a few blocks from Michael's office on Madison Avenue. I'd passed it countless times during our relationship, never thinking twice about it. Daniel turned his phone screen toward me, and I could see it was a video, paused at the beginning. I waited in the lobby for an hour before I saw them come down from the elevators together. My wedding guests were completely silent, but I could feel their eyes on me. My great-aunt Margaret, who had flown in from Seattle, my college roommates who had taken time off work to be here, my co-workers from the marketing firm where I'd worked my way up to senior account manager. They were all witnessing what was supposed to be my fairy tale turning into my worst nightmare. "Play it," I said. The video started, and immediately I could see the elegant lobby of the Meridian Hotel. The timestamp showed last Thursday at 3:47 p.m. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the elevator doors opened. Michael stepped out first, looking around the lobby cautiously. He was wearing the same navy suit he'd worn to work that day. I remembered because I'd helped him pick out his tie that morning over coffee in our apartment. Behind him came a woman with long blonde hair, wearing a red dress that looked expensive. Sarah, his ex-wife. But it wasn't just that they were together. It was how they were together. Michael's hand was on the small of her back, guiding her through the lobby. She was laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. They looked intimate, comfortable, like a couple who had been together for years. As they reached the lobby's exit, Michael pulled Sarah closer and kissed her. Not a quick, friendly peck. A deep, passionate kiss that lasted several seconds. The kind of kiss you give someone you're in love with. The kind of kiss he'd given me just that morning before leaving for what he claimed were last-minute wedding preparations. I felt like I was going to be sick. The beautiful ballroom started to spin around me, the crystal chandeliers blurring into streaks of light. My carefully applied makeup, done by Manhattan's most sought-after wedding makeup artist, felt heavy and fake on my face. "There's more," Daniel said quietly. The video continued, following them outside the hotel. I watched as Michael hailed a taxi, but before they got in, Sarah said something to him that made him laugh. Then she handed him what looked like a key card. A hotel key card. "I went back to the hotel the next day," Daniel explained. "Talked to the concierge. They'd been renting a room there every Thursday for the past 6 months, always paid in cash, always checked in separately and left together. 6 months. For 6 months, while I was planning our wedding, picking out flowers, tasting cakes, sending invitations to everyone we loved, Michael had been meeting his ex-wife at a hotel every week. The room was spinning faster now. I could hear my mother crying somewhere behind me, and my father's voice saying something I couldn't quite make out. The smell of the white roses in my bouquet was making me nauseous. "Emma," Michael said, stepping toward me, his face pale. "I can explain. It's not what it looks like." I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I'd lived with for 2 years, who knew how I liked my coffee in the morning and that I was afraid of thunderstorms, who had held me when my grandmother died and who had promised to love me forever just 20 minutes ago. "Not what it looks like?" I repeated, my voice getting stronger with each word. "It looks like you've been having an affair with your ex-wife for 6 months while planning our wedding. So please, Michael, tell me what it actually is. The October rain outside had gotten heavier, and I could hear it pattering against the windows of the plaza. The sound that had seemed romantic when we were planning this day now sounded ominous, like the world itself was crying. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. The worst part was that I could see in Michael's eyes that he'd been caught, and he wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. He was just standing there in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking guilty as hell. And I realized that the man I was about to marry was a complete stranger. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I stood there in my dream wedding dress, in the ballroom I'd fantasized about since I was a little girl, staring at the man who was supposed to become my husband in the next few minutes. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across his face, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. "Say something," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the sound of rain pattering against the plaza's tall windows. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it again. His hands, which had been steady when he'd slipped my engagement ring on my finger 14 months ago, were shaking now. The boutonniere on his tuxedo lapel, a single white rose that matched my bouquet, seemed to mock the moment with its perfect, pristine beauty. "Emma, I never meant for this to happen," he finally said. "What exactly is this, Michael?" My voice was getting stronger, fueled by a rage I didn't even know I possessed. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks like you've been cheating on me with your ex-wife while I planned our wedding." Daniel, still holding his phone, stepped forward slightly. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Show her the hotel records, Michael. Tell her about the credit card statements." "What credit card statements?" I turned to face Daniel, my wedding train rustling against the marble floor. "The one he's been using to pay for dinners, gifts, weekend trips," Daniel replied. "Sarah may have thought she was hiding this from me, but I'm a forensic accountant. I notice when money goes missing from our joint account." My stomach dropped. "What weekend trips?" Michael's face went even paler, if that was possible. "Emma, please, let me explain." "Answer the question," I shouted, my voice echoing off the ballroom's ornate walls. Several guests in the front row jumped at the sudden volume. My mother, still sitting in her navy dress, was now openly crying into a tissue. We went to the Hamptons a few times," Michael admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The Hamptons, where Michael had told me he was going for bachelor parties with his college friends, where he'd claimed his phone had bad service, which was why he barely called or texted those weekends, where he'd said he was clearing his head before our wedding. "How many times?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Emma, how many times, Michael?" He looked down at his perfectly polished dress shoes. 5 times over the past 3 months. 5 times. While I was addressing wedding invitations, confirming catering details, and having final dress fittings, my fiancé was taking romantic getaways with his ex-wife. If you're watching this unfold and can't believe what's happening, make sure to like this video and leave a comment about what you would do in this situation. Grace, my maid of honor, appeared at my side. "Emma, honey, do you want to sit down?" "No," I said firmly. "I want answers." "Daniel, what else do you know?" Daniel looked uncomfortable, glancing between me and Michael. "Maybe this should be private." "Nothing about this is private anymore," I said, gesturing to the room full of our wedding guests who were watching this disaster unfold in real time. "Everyone here came to celebrate our marriage. They deserve to know why there isn't going to be one." My father, who had been standing near the altar in his formal tuxedo, finally found his voice. "Michael, son, is this true? All of it?" Michael looked up at my father, the man who had welcomed him into our family, who had helped him pick out my engagement ring, who had shaken his hand just an hour ago and told him how happy he was to officially call him son. "Mr. Johnson, yes, it's true." The admission hit the room like a physical blow. I heard my mother gasp, and several guests started whispering among themselves. The string quartet, which had been playing soft classical music throughout this entire ordeal, finally stopped playing, leaving us in complete silence except for the rain outside. "Why?" I asked, the single word carrying all the pain and confusion I was feeling. Michael finally looked directly at me, and I could see tears in his eyes. Sarah and we never really got closure after our divorce. We tried to stay apart, but when she moved back to New York last year— Last year? I interrupted. Sarah moved back to New York last year, and you didn't tell me? I didn't think it mattered, he said weakly. You didn't think it mattered that your ex-wife moved to the same city where we live, and you didn't mention it to your fiancé? The pieces were starting to fall into place now. All those late nights at the office, the mysterious phone calls he'd take in the other room, the way he'd started being less affectionate, less present, even as our wedding date approached. I'd attributed it to pre-wedding stress, but now I realized he'd been pulling away because he was falling back in love with someone else. Does she know? I asked. Does Sarah know about today? About our wedding? Daniel answered before Michael could. She knows. In fact, she's been trying to figure out how to tell Michael to leave you without looking like the other woman. She's been feeling guilty about it for weeks. Guilty, I repeated, tasting the word like it was poison. She's been feeling guilty. Emma, Michael said, taking a step toward me. I do love you. I've loved you for 3 years, but Sarah and we have history. We understand each other in a way that— Stop, I said, holding up my hand. Just stop talking. I looked around the ballroom at all the faces staring back at me. My family, my friends, Michael's family, who looked just as shocked as everyone else. The flowers, the elegant table settings, the perfectly arranged wedding cake on its own table near the windows. Everything I'd spent months planning, everything I'd dreamed about, reduced to the backdrop for the most humiliating moment of my life. But as I stood there in my beautiful dress, surrounded by the ruins of my fairy tale, I realized something. The humiliation was fading, and in its place was something else entirely. Relief. Because as much as this hurt, as much as I wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear forever, a tiny voice in the back of my mind was whispering something I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. I'd been having doubts too. The realization hit me like a physical blow. As I stood there in the Plaza ballroom, surrounded by the wreckage of my wedding day, I had to admit something I'd been pushing down for months. I'd been having doubts about Michael too. Not about cheating, never about that, but about whether we were really right for each other. About whether the man I was marrying was the same person I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. About whether I was settling for a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt empty in my heart. You know what the worst part is, Michael? I said, my voice steadier now than it had been since Daniel walked through those doors. I don't think I'm even surprised. Michael's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean that somewhere deep down, I knew something was wrong. You've been different for months, distant. Like you were going through the motions of being engaged to me, but your heart wasn't in it. The October rain outside had intensified, creating a steady drumming against the tall windows. The sound seemed to match the rhythm of my heartbeat as I finally allowed myself to say the words I'd been afraid to think. I convinced myself it was pre-wedding jitters, I continued, addressing not just Michael, but the entire room full of people who'd come to celebrate what they thought was true love. I told myself that all couples go through rough patches, that the stress of wedding planning was making us both crazy. But it wasn't wedding stress, was it, Michael? It was guilt. He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. Do you remember our engagement party last Christmas? I asked. At my parents' house in Westchester? You disappeared for 20 minutes to take a phone call. You said it was your boss, but now I'm wondering, was it Sarah? Michael's silence was answer enough. I turned to Daniel, who was still standing there holding his phone like evidence in a courtroom. When did your wife move back to New York? October of last year, he replied. Right after we got married. She said she wanted a fresh start. October, I repeated. Our engagement party was in December. So she'd been back in the city for 2 months when you got that mysterious phone call. The timeline was becoming clearer now, and with each piece that fell into place, I felt both more devastated and more vindicated. My instincts hadn't been wrong. I'd just been too afraid to trust them. Grace, who had been standing silently beside me throughout this entire ordeal, finally spoke up. Emma, do you remember what you told me last month, when we were having coffee in Soho? I looked at my best friend, confused. What are you talking about? You said you felt like you were planning a wedding, but not preparing for a marriage. You said Michael seemed more excited about the honeymoon in Italy than about actually being married to you. The memory came flooding back. We'd been sitting at our favorite cafe on Spring Street, going over final wedding details when I'd broken down crying over my latte. I told Grace that I felt like Michael and I were more like roommates than lovers lately, that our conversations had become surface level, about logistics and schedules instead of dreams and feelings. I told you it was just stress, I said quietly. And I believed you because I wanted to, Grace replied. But looking back now, Emma, you've been trying to convince yourself to be happy for months. The truth of her words hit me like a slap. I had been trying to convince myself. I'd been so focused on having the perfect wedding, the perfect dress, the perfect venue, that I'd ignored the fact that the groom felt like a stranger. Is there anything else? I asked Daniel, though I wasn't sure my heart could take much more. He hesitated, then nodded. Sarah's pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. The sound of rain against the windows seemed to intensify, and I could hear my mother's sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind me. What did you say? I whispered. Sarah's pregnant, Daniel repeated, his voice gentle but clear. About 6 weeks along. She told me last night. She thought it was mine at first, but then she did the math. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. 6 weeks pregnant, which meant the baby was conceived around the time Michael and I were sending out wedding invitations. Michael, I said, my voice deadly calm. Is the baby yours? He looked like he was going to be sick. Emma, Is the baby yours? We don't know for sure, he said weakly. It could be Daniel's, but it could be yours. Yes. The single word confirmation felt like a dagger to my chest. Not only had my fiancé been cheating on me with his ex-wife for 6 months, not only had he been taking romantic getaways with her while I planned our wedding, but now there was a possibility that she was carrying his child. The child I'd hoped we would have together someday. The future I'd imagined for us, Sunday mornings in bed, family vacations, teaching our kids to ride bikes in Central Park. All of it was disappearing like smoke. But instead of collapsing, instead of falling to pieces in front of 200 wedding guests, I felt something else rising up inside me. Something strong and fierce and absolutely certain. I was done. Everyone can go home, I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. The wedding is off. I started walking toward the exit, my train trailing behind me across the marble floor. But before I reached the doors, I turned back to face Michael one last time. For what it's worth, I said, I hope the baby is yours, because then at least one good thing will come out of this disaster. But don't ever contact me again. Don't call, don't text, don't show up at my apartment. We're done. As I pushed through the ballroom doors and into the plaza's elegant lobby, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. Guests talking in shocked whispers, my mother crying, my father's angry voice demanding answers from Michael. But I kept walking, my wedding dress rustling with each step, my head held high despite the fact that my entire life had just imploded. Because for the first time in months, I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. And what I wanted was to get as far away from Michael Thompson as possible. The elevator ride to the plaza's bridal suite felt like the longest 30 seconds of my life. I stood there in my Vera Wang gown, watching the floor numbers climb, and tried to process what had just happened. 24 hours ago, I was Emma Johnson, excited bride-to-be. Now I was Emma Johnson, woman whose wedding had just been destroyed by her fiancé's pregnant ex-wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. Grace had followed me up, along with my mother and my 2 other bridesmaids, Lily and Charlotte. The suite, which had been the site of so much excitement just hours earlier when we were getting ready, now felt like a mausoleum. My makeup bags were still scattered across the vanity. The champagne bottle we'd opened while doing final touch-ups sat half empty on the side table, and the garment bag that had held my dress hung empty in the closet like a ghost. "Emma, honey, sit down," my mother said, her voice thick with tears. She was still wearing her navy mother of the bride dress, but her carefully styled hair was messed up from where she'd been running her hands through it. "I can't sit in this dress," I said, though the truth was I couldn't bear to take it off yet either. Taking off the dress would make it real. It would mean accepting that my wedding day was over before it had really begun. Grace appeared with a glass of water. "Drink this, you look pale." I accepted the water, but didn't drink it. Instead, I walked to the window that overlooked Fifth Avenue. From up here, I could see people going about their normal Saturday afternoon activities. Tourists taking pictures, couples walking hand in hand, families heading to Central Park. The world was continuing as if nothing had happened, as if my entire life hadn't just been turned upside down. "I need to call the vendors," I said suddenly. "The photographer, the caterer, the DJ. They need to know the reception is canceled." "Emma, don't worry about that right now," Lily said. She was my college roommate from NYU, and she'd flown in from Los Angeles for the wedding. "Your dad is handling all of that downstairs." "And the honeymoon," I continued, my mind racing. "We're supposed to leave for Italy tomorrow morning. I need to cancel the flights, the hotels." "Emma, stop." Grace's voice was firm. She took my hands and forced me to look at her. "You don't have to handle everything right now. Just breathe." But I couldn't breathe. The enormity of what had just happened was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a canceled wedding. This was my entire life falling apart. Michael and I lived together in a one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side. We had joint bank accounts, shared credit cards, a lease that didn't expire until next summer. We'd been building a life together for 3 years, and now I had to figure out how to untangle all of it. "What am I going to do?" I said, more to myself than to anyone else. "We live together. Our names are on everything together. I don't even know where to start." My mother sat down on the edge of the bed, her face streaked with mascara. "You're going to come home with us tonight, to Westchester. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "I can't just leave," I protested. "I have work on Monday and—" "Emma." Charlotte, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. She was my most practical friend, a lawyer who never sugarcoated anything. "You just found out your fiancé has been cheating on you for 6 months and possibly got his ex-wife pregnant. You're allowed to take a few days to fall apart." Fall apart. The words hit me like a physical blow because that's exactly what was happening. I was falling apart, piece by piece, like a building being demolished in slow motion. My phone, which had been silenced during the ceremony, suddenly started buzzing with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. Word was spreading fast. "I can't deal with this right now," I said, turning the phone face down on the vanity. Grace picked it up before I could stop her. "Emma, you have 17 missed calls from Michael. Delete them. And about 40 text messages. Delete those too. Some of these are from other people," she said, scrolling through the screen. "Your Aunt Sarah from Seattle, your cousin James, your boss." The thought of having to explain this to everyone, of having to relive this humiliation over and over again, made me feel sick. How do you tell people that your wedding was called off because the groom was cheating? How do you explain that you're not just heartbroken, you're completely humiliated? If you're still watching this story and wondering how someone recovers from something like this, make sure to subscribe because the journey is far from over. "I need to get out of this dress," I said finally. Grace and my mother helped me out of the gown, carefully hanging it in the closet next to the empty garment bag. Without the structure of the dress, I felt smaller somehow, more vulnerable in just my white silk slip and the expensive undergarments I'd bought specifically for my wedding night. A wedding night that was never going to happen. I put on the jeans and sweater I'd brought to change into after the reception and immediately felt more like myself. The bride was gone. Now I was just Emma again, trying to figure out what came next. "There's something else we need to talk about," Charlotte said gently. "About Michael's stuff in your apartment." The apartment. Our apartment. The place where we'd made coffee together every morning, where we'd watched Netflix on Sunday nights, where he'd proposed to me last Christmas morning next to our tree. The thought of going back there, of seeing his clothes in our closet and his toothbrush by the sink, made my stomach turn. "I can't go back there tonight," I said. "I can't face it." "You don't have to," my mother said firmly. "Grace and I will go get some of your things tomorrow. You can stay with us until you figure out what you want to do." What I wanted to do. The question felt impossible to answer because an hour ago I'd known exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to marry Michael, go on our honeymoon to Tuscany, come back and start trying for a baby, maybe look for a bigger apartment in a year or two. Now I had no idea what I wanted except to never see Michael Thompson again. Do you think she really loves him? I asked suddenly. Sarah, I mean, or is this just about the baby? Grace and my mother exchanged a look. Does it matter? Charlotte asked. Either way, he chose her over you, and he's been lying to you for months. She was right, but somehow it did matter to me. I needed to understand how this had happened. How the man who had told me he loved me every day for 3 years, who had planned a future with me, who had seemed so excited about our wedding just that morning, could have been living this double life. My phone buzzed again, and despite myself, I looked at it. It was a text from Michael. Emma, please call me. I know you hate me right now, but we need to talk. There are things you don't understand, things I don't understand, as if the problem was my comprehension and not his betrayal. I showed the text to Grace, who immediately deleted it. He's going to keep trying, she said. You need to be prepared for that. I know. But what I wasn't prepared for was the knock on the door that came 5 minutes later. Grace answered it, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. You've got to be kidding me, she said. Who is it? I asked, though I already knew. It's Michael, and he's not alone. Through the hotel suite's peephole, I could see Michael standing in the hallway, still in his tuxedo, but with his bow tie undone and hanging around his neck. Next to him stood a woman I recognized from photos. Sarah, his ex-wife. She was shorter than I'd expected, with the kind of blonde hair that cost a fortune to maintain and a face that belonged in magazines. Even in this moment, even knowing what she'd done, I had to admit she was beautiful. She was also showing the slightest hint of a pregnancy bump under her black dress. Emma, I know you're in there, Michael called through the door. We need to talk. Go away, Michael, I replied, not moving from where I stood 5 feet from the door. My mother, Grace, and my bridesmaids had formed a protective semicircle around me, like they were expecting a battle. Please, just give me 5 minutes to explain. There's nothing to explain, I called back. I saw the video. I heard the truth. We're done. That's not the whole truth, said a woman's voice. Sarah, there are things you need to know. Grace stepped forward, her voice sharp with anger. Are you seriously asking the woman whose wedding you just destroyed to listen to you explain your affair? It wasn't an affair, Sarah said through the door. Not the way you think. Despite everything, despite how much I wanted to never see either of them again, my curiosity got the better of me. What could she possibly say that would make any of this better? Mom, take the girls and go down to the lobby, I said quietly. I need to hear this. Emma, no, my mother protested. You don't owe them anything. I know, but I need to understand. I need closure. Grace squeezed my hand. We'll be right outside this door. If you need us, just say the word. I waited until I heard their footsteps retreating down the hall, then opened the door. Michael and Sarah stood there looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Up close, Sarah was even more beautiful, but she also looked exhausted and stressed. Her makeup was smudged, and her hands were shaking slightly. 5 minutes, I said, stepping back to let them in. Then I never want to see either of you again. They entered the suite that had been the scene of so much joy just hours earlier when I was getting ready for what I thought would be the best day of my life. The contrast was almost too much to bear. Emma, Michael started, but Sarah held up her hand. Let me talk, she said. This is my fault, and Emma deserves to hear it from me. I crossed my arms and waited. Michael and I got divorced 3 years ago because we thought we wanted different things, Sarah began, her voice steady but quiet. He wanted to stay in New York and build his career. I wanted to travel, to see the world, to figure out who I was outside of our marriage. So we ended it, and it was civil, amicable even. I stayed silent, waiting for her to get to the point. I moved to London, then Paris, then eventually ended up in Chicago where I met Daniel. We fell in love fast, got married within 8 months. I thought I'd moved on completely. She paused, glancing at Michael before continuing. But when Daniel got transferred to his company's New York office last year, I knew I'd have to face the possibility of running into Michael again. And you did more than run into him, I said. My voice flat. We had coffee, one coffee at a Starbucks near his office, just to clear the air, to make sure things wouldn't be awkward if we happened to see each other around the city. Sarah's hands moved unconsciously to her stomach. But that coffee turned into dinner a week later, and dinner turned into more. Michael finally spoke up. Emma, I fought it for months. I swear to you I tried to stay away from her. But you didn't, I said simply. No, I didn't. The October rain had gotten heavier, drumming against the windows of the plaza suite with increasing intensity. The sound filled the silence that stretched between us, and I found myself thinking about how rain was supposed to be good luck on your wedding day. What a joke that had turned out to be. The thing is, Sarah continued, I realized I never stopped loving Michael. And after spending time with him again, I knew he never stopped loving me either. Then why didn't you just get divorced from Daniel and remarry each other? I asked. Why involve me in this disaster? Sarah and Michael exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know. Because Michael was already with you, Sarah said quietly. And he thought he was happy. He thought what you two had was real love. It was real love, Michael said, looking directly at me for the first time since they'd entered the room. Emma, what we had was real. But what Sarah and I have, it's different. It's what exactly? I demanded. It's everything, he said. And those two words hit harder than all the rest combined. I felt like I'd been slapped. Not because he loved her, I'd already figured that out, but because of the way he said it. Like what we'd had was nice, but what they had was epic. Like I'd been a placeholder until his real love came back to town. When did you know? I asked. When did you know you were going to choose her over me? Michael ran his hands through his hair, messing up the style that had taken him 20 minutes to perfect that morning. I kept telling myself I could make it work with you, that I could forget about Sarah and be the husband you deserved. Right up until you were walking down the aisle today, I was trying to convince myself I was making the right choice. But watching you in that dress, saying those vows, he shook his head. I couldn't do it to you, Emma. I couldn't marry you when I knew my heart belonged to someone else. It wouldn't have been fair to either of us. So you thought it was better to let your ex-wife's husband crash our wedding and humiliate me in front of 200 people? That wasn't supposed to happen, Sarah said quickly. Daniel wasn't supposed to find out. I was going to tell him everything after Michael and I figured out how to handle this. Handle this, I repeated. You mean how to destroy my life with minimum inconvenience to yourselves? Emma, that's not, Michael started. No, that's exactly what it is, I interrupted. You two wanted to have your cake and eat it too. You wanted to sneak around behind both our backs until you figured out a neat, tidy way to end your current relationships and start fresh with each other. The truth of it was written all over their faces. The baby, I said suddenly. Is it Michael's? Sarah nodded. We're pretty sure. The timing, it matches up. Pretty sure, I said with a bitter laugh. Well, that's romantic. I walked to the window and looked down at Fifth Avenue again. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and people were hurrying along the sidewalks with umbrellas and newspapers held over their heads, everyone trying to get somewhere warm and dry. That's all I wanted, too. To get somewhere warm and dry, somewhere this couldn't touch me. I need you both to leave now, I said without turning around. Emma, Michael started. I said leave. I heard them moving toward the door, but then Sarah's voice stopped them. For what it's worth, Emma, I am sorry. You seem like a good person, and you didn't deserve this. I turned around then and looked at this woman who had been sharing the man I loved for 6 months without my knowledge. She did look sorry, but she also looked relieved, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. You're right, I said. I didn't deserve this. But you know what? In a weird way, I'm grateful it happened. Both of them looked surprised. Because if Daniel hadn't shown up today, I would have married you, Michael. I would have spent years wondering why you seemed distant, why our marriage felt like we were just going through the motions. I would have blamed myself for not being enough, for not making you happy. I walked closer to them, my voice getting stronger with each word. But now I know the truth. The problem wasn't me. The problem was that you're a coward who couldn't be honest about what he wanted, and you're a woman who thought having an affair was easier than getting a divorce. Michael flinched like I'd hit him. I hope you're happy together, I continued. I really do. Because after what you put Daniel and me through today, you better be damn sure this is worth it. They left without another word, and I was finally alone in the suite that had been meant for celebrating the beginning of my new life. Instead, it had become the place where my old life officially ended. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the missed calls and messages. So many people wanting to know if I was okay, wanting to help, wanting to understand what had happened. But for the first time since Daniel had walked through those ballroom doors, I actually felt like I might be okay. Not today, and probably not tomorrow, but eventually. I deleted Michael's number from my contacts, blocked him on all social media, and then did something that surprised even me. I laughed, because as devastating as this day had been, as humiliating and painful and world-shattering as it was, I was free. Free from a relationship that hadn't been real for months. Free from a future that would have been built on lies. Free from wondering why I felt so disconnected from the man I was supposed to spend my life with. I was 29 years old, living in the greatest city in the world, with a career I loved and friends who would drop everything to support me. I had my whole life ahead of me to find real love, the kind that doesn't require secret hotel meetings and lies and betrayal, the kind that makes you want to choose that person every single day, not just when your ex isn't available. I picked up my phone and called Grace. "Come back up," I said when she answered. "And bring that bottle of champagne from the bridal suite. We're going to toast to new beginnings. Because sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having your worst day ever. It clears the way for something better." And I was ready for better. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe for more real-life stories that show how even our darkest moments can lead to our greatest breakthroughs. Sometimes life has to fall apart before it can come together in a way that's actually meant for us.